Moolenaar covered 5 issues in 5 minutes. China's support for Iran, a possible Chinese missile downing a U.S. fighter jet. Watch the exchange first. Then we'll step back and unpack what it really tells us.
Chairman, Secretary Rubio, thanks for being with us today, and thank you for the important work you're doing around the world and for the sacrifice you and your family are making in order to do that. We appreciate it. Also, just want to say my apologies for the young gentleman from the CCP-funded Code Pink who interrupted your opening statement. I want to go right into some questions about the CCP. I wonder if you could characterize China's support for Iran, military or otherwise.
Okay, well, it's an important question. I think, let me start with this point. I don't think the Chinese have publicly said and repeatedly said and told us in our visit as well, they are not in favor of what Iran is doing in the Straits. They are opposed to that, as is virtually every country in the world, some obviously more open than others, but they've stated that point. I would say that China has not provided any assistance to Iran that in any way impeded our operations or ability to operate. They clearly have had a previous relationship, and you can see that in some of the military equipment that they have is certainly of Chinese origin, and likewise. But we have seen no signs in the short term that during this situation, that anything they've been providing them has in any way changed the dynamic in the battlefield, and I think they've been quite cautious about engaging themselves in it. That said, we would like to see their help at the United Nations. We have a resolution right now. It has the highest number of co-sponsors of any resolution ever proposed before the Security Council that would, create authorities to deal with what's happening in the Straits. And unfortunately, the Chinese continue to threaten a veto of it. So if, in fact, they are against the closure of the Straits, they should be endorsing this, or at a minimum, abstaining and not using a veto of it. The Russians are another matter, of course. They're vehemently opposed to that resolution for a variety of different reasons. But I would say that as time goes on, the Chinese economy will begin to be negatively impacted by what the Iranians are doing for 2 reasons. The first is because the concept of a tolling system sounds intriguing. The reality of it is very hard to implement. And in fact, you saw a Chinese destined vessel attacked and hit 2 weeks ago by the Iranians. And the second is because if you, for an export-driven economy like China, to have countries around the world's ability to purchase diminish as more of that goes towards fuel, that will begin to have an impact on their exports as well. So I think China, in the short to long term, should have, and we've made this point to the Chinese, have a vested interest as well in ensuring that Iran stop its activity.
Thank you. There was a media report recently that Iran may have used a Chinese missile to shoot down a U.S. fighter jet. Are you familiar with that report?
I've seen that report. I can't comment on the specific technology that they use. Suffice it to say that, look, they do own Chinese systems. They own some Russian systems, and they've developed some native systems, especially in the drone technology. But I don't know specifically of that. I mean, I'd have to refer you to the Department of War. I would hate to comment on something and give you a misleading answer.
Thank you. During the recent China summit, I was thankful President Trump raised the issue of China's prisoners of conscience, and the President indicated that Xi Jinping is seriously considering the release of Pastor Ezra Jin, and I know this is something you care deeply about. Have there been any tangible follow-ups or indications regarding this case or others like Jimmy Lai since the summit?
Well, first of all, Jimmy Lai, the President's raised it twice. He raised it once when we met in South Korea, late last year, October, whenever that was, raised it again during this visit. Pastor Jin is obviously a more recent case, and it was also raised in the meeting. And I don't want to do anything to jeopardize his status or what's working, other than to say that I'm cautiously optimistic that we could potentially find a positive resolution to his case. And those talks and that communication is ongoing. But sometimes with these things, they work better when they just happen. And so I don't want to say anything publicly that could undermine or harm that effort in any way, but be clear that we have raised that, and it is a priority for us.
Thank you. As you know, in Michigan, we're proud to have a large Chaldean community, many of whom are still having deep family and religious ties to Iraq, Iraq's Christian communities. particularly Chaldean Christians, have faced years of displacement, economic hardship, security threats in the Nineveh Plain and surrounding areas. How is the administration supporting religious minorities, including Iraq's Chaldean community?
Well, as you know, they're just recently forming a new government with a new prime minister. And so I think the fundamental challenge in Iraq has been and continues to be what level of influence do the Iranian-backed Shia militias have inside the country over the government. And in fact, we faced that situation very dramatically during Epic Fury, when in fact there were launches occurring against our facilities both in Baghdad and in Rubio. So it would be raised within the context of our relationship with the new prime minister. We want to give him a chance to be successful, but we also want to give him a chance to be responsive to the issues that we've raised, including the issues just outlined about, unfortunately, a much smaller Christian community than it was there 25, 30, 40 years ago, but still nonetheless facing very difficult circumstances. Obviously, we also want to see a government that's less under the domain or control of these Iranian-backed militias who still remain very powerful in the country. So those have been the leading features, but we're going to give this new prime minister a chance. We're willing to do things that are helpful to him, but obviously we have things that we're concerned about, primarily the Iranian Shia militias and the influence they have and the danger they pose to the region and to the country. But related to that is the issue you raised, and that is these minority communities inside of Iraq who have faced oppression now for the better part of 20 years and have seen their numbers in areas diminish as more and more people have left the region. But it is a priority, and we do raise it because we think it's important for a sort of a diverse nation like Iraq, for every segment of society to have not just representation, but to feel safe and respected inside the country. It is a feature of our talks with them.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you can add on to whatever you'd like to say further, but I also want to ask if you can, we've learned a lot over the past few years about critical minerals, about reliable supply chains. You've been doing a lot in this area with Pax Silica, Quad Critical Minerals Initials Framework. After you maybe respond, I would love to learn a little bit more about that.
Well, I made my point. My point is we spend more money than anybody else on foreign aid. By far, not even close. And we're going to spend it smarter than we ever have before as well. Part of these health compacts, 32 countries around the world have signed compacts with us that will allow us not just to deal with the acute cases that are occurring, but actually strengthen the health programs of these countries so that they become self-sustaining over time. Some will get there in 5 years, some may take 10. But all these countries love these MOUs because we're building their domestic capabilities to address these challenges. I've always said the best foreign aid program is an aid program that ends because the country doesn't need it anymore. South Korea is a great example. This was a country that was an aid recipient. Today they are an aid donor. We'd love to see that replicated, and these countries that are signing the MOUs love it because they've gone from an era of dependency to an era of self-sustainment that we're helping and partnering with them directly with their healthcare systems. We're not just standing up NGOs that come in from abroad and go into the country and tell them this is what you need to be doing. We are empowering the national health agencies of our partner nations so they can deal with this. Now, on the issue of critical minerals, look, it's an issue of global consensus now. Forget about which country it is. It is not healthy for the global economy, and frankly, it is dangerous for national security and the security of the world to depend on any single country for 90% of anything that's critical to your industrial base, your defense base, your technology base. And so I think there is, we hosted Pax Silica, which you mentioned, is a great conglomerate of countries that have signed and cooperating on protecting particularly the supply chains related to artificial intelligence and development in that field, as well as hopefully standards that go associated with it. In the field of critical minerals, we had a ministerial, I don't remember, but March or April this year, earlier this year, we had 36 or more countries attend the critical minerals ministerial. And every country you go into today, and at every embassy around the world, critical minerals are a key component of our diplomacy. Not just the access to the raw materials, but the ability to process those materials into a usable product that are critical. And obviously, we are doing that overlaid with a mapping of our vulnerabilities. And I don't say our vulnerabilities. These are the vulnerabilities of Japan, the vulnerabilities of South Korea, the vulnerabilities of the majority of Europe, and frankly, of the world. We simply have a hyper-concentration of whether it's critical minerals or you could add pharmaceuticals to that, concentrated in the hands of one country. And it leaves us dangerously dependent and cannot continue. And dangerously dependent because you can be cut off in a crisis, you can be cut off in a contingency in which they use it against you for leverage. So it's an all-hands-on-deck approach, and I would say almost anywhere you travel in the world, you will find, if you interact with our embassy, that critical minerals and critical mineral agreements and critical mineral cooperation has become central and core focus of our economic diplomacy around the world.
Wanted to just follow up on a little bit of a separate issue, but it's something that I know you think about. When you think about Haiti and all they've been through, what more can the administration do? What more can Congress do? What ways does the international community need to step up?
Well, on Haiti, we have this gang suppression force which replaced the MSS that was standing there. It'll come at a fraction of the cost to the U.S., about 100-something million versus 800 or 900 million, because other countries have stepped up and donated to it. The force is actually over-recruited. The number of commitments we have for the force is larger than the number of slots we needed available. And the core of it is this: these gangs won't just sit back. These groups won't just sit back and watch gangs operate. This international security force that will be there will be on the ground to take and hold territory from the gangs, so that the government can gain in strength, hopefully be able to have an election, but also take back their economic vibrancy. This is an effort that was endorsed at the United Nations. It took a lot of work at the United Nations to get it approved, so that's what's opened the door for all these countries to join it. It's going to be a challenge. Haiti's a very big challenge, but this is the best plan we've had in a long time to address it. It has the support of the international community, not just rhetorical support, but monetary support and troop contributions and police contributions. And we hope it's successful. It has to be successful because there is no plan B at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
What made this exchange land was the breadth of ground covered in 5 minutes. Representative John Moolenaar, who chairs the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, used his time on the Foreign Affairs Committee to cover 5 distinct issues. China's role in the Iran crisis, a possible Chinese origin missile used against a U.S. fighter jet, the release of Pastor Ezra Jin and the case of Jimmy Lai, the plight of Iraq's Chaldean Christian community, and the architecture of the administration's critical minerals strategy. Each issue could have filled its own hearing. The member compressed them into a single coherent line of questioning. The first remarkable detail of the exchange was the member's opening apology. The young gentleman from the CCP-funded Code Pink had interrupted the secretary's opening statement earlier in the hearing. Moolenaar apologized to the secretary for the disruption and used the moment to name the funding source he attributes to that organization. Whether that funding claim is fully substantiated in the public record is a separate empirical question. What is meaningful for the hearing record is that a sitting chairman of the China Select Committee used his 5 minutes to put the funding link in the formal congressional transcript at the very start of his questioning. Moolenaar's first substantive question went directly to the strategic core of the moment. Could the secretary characterize China's support for Iran, military or otherwise? The secretary's answer was carefully calibrated. The Chinese government has publicly and repeatedly said it is not in favor of what Iran is doing in the Straits. Beijing has not provided assistance that has impeded American operations during the current situation. Previous military relationships are visible in the equipment Iran uses, but no recent material change in the dynamic on the battlefield has been observed. The framing is consequential because it draws a clear line between historical relationships and current conduct. The secretary then made the most important strategic point of the exchange. China's economic interests in the Strait of Hormuz are real and growing. A Chinese-destined commercial vessel was attacked and hit by Iranian forces 2 weeks before the hearing. That single incident captures the broader argument. The closure of the strait or the imposition of a tolling system would not hurt American interests more than it hurts Chinese interests over time. Beijing's export-driven economy depends on global purchasing power that erodes when energy prices spike. The secretary was making the case that the Chinese have a structural reason to want the strait open. The administration's diplomatic posture is built around a United Nations Security Council resolution that would create the international authorities to deal with what is happening in the strait. The secretary said the resolution has the highest number of co-sponsors of any resolution ever proposed before the Security Council. That is an extraordinary claim if accurate. The Chinese delegation continues to threaten a veto of the resolution. Russia is vehemently opposed for separate reasons. The secretary's argument was that if Beijing is genuinely against the closure of the strait, the obvious diplomatic posture would be either to endorse the resolution or to abstain. A veto is hard to justify on its stated terms. Moolenaar then asked about a media report indicating that Iran may have used a Chinese-origin missile to shoot down a United States fighter jet. The secretary said he could not comment on the specific technology Iran used in any particular incident. He noted that Iran owns Chinese systems and Russian systems and has developed native systems, particularly in drone technology. He referred the member to the Department of War for detailed technical attribution. The deferral is appropriate. The fact that the question was asked on the record in the presence of the Secretary of State is itself a signal to the public, to the Iranian government, and to the Chinese government. The exchange then turned to prisoners of conscience. During the recent summit between President Trump and Xi Jinping, the president raised the case of Pastor Ezra Jin. President Xi was reported to be seriously considering Pastor Jin's release. The member also asked about Jimmy Lai, the Hong Kong publisher whose case has become a global symbol of Beijing's campaign against press freedom. The secretary confirmed that the president had raised Lai's case twice, once at the October meeting in South Korea and again during the recent summit. Pastor Jin's case was also raised. The secretary expressed cautious optimism without giving public details that could undermine the negotiation. The secretary's caution about not saying anything publicly that could harm the effort is the operationally correct posture for negotiations of this kind. Public commentary can elevate a case in ways that make it harder for the counterparty to release the prisoner without appearing to capitulate. The diplomatic literature on hostage releases and prisoner of conscience cases is largely consistent on this point. Quiet pressure plus high-level commitments plus a discrete path to release is usually the only configuration that works. The member did not press for additional public details. That restraint contributed to the productive tone of the round. Moolenaar then turned to Iraq's Chaldean Christian community, a community with deep ties to his Michigan district. Chaldeans have faced years of displacement, economic hardship, and security threats in the Nineveh Plain. The member asked how the administration is supporting religious minorities, including the Chaldean community. The secretary's response located the immediate challenge in a larger Iraqi institutional question. How much influence do the Iranian-backed Shia militias hold inside the new Iraqi government, and what does that influence mean for the security and the political space of the country's minority communities? The secretary referenced what he described as Operation Epic Fury, during which the United States had to respond to launches against American facilities in Baghdad and Erbil. The detail is a reminder that the security relationship between the United States and Iraq is currently shaped by active conflict with Iranian-backed militia networks. Any new Iraqi prime minister inherits both the formal relationship with the United States and the practical reality of operating in a country where the security forces are not fully under unified national control. The secretary's framing was that the administration wants to give the new prime minister space to be successful while raising direct concerns. The secretary's framing on minority communities is worth pausing on. He said that the United States raises the issue with Iraqi leadership because it is important for a diverse nation like Iraq for every segment of society to have not just representation, but to feel safe and respected inside the country. That formulation is a diplomatic standard rather than a strict legal requirement. The fact that the United States consistently raises it, in hearing after hearing and meeting after meeting, is how the issue stays on the Iraqi domestic agenda. Without that sustained external attention, the political pressure on the minority security question would diminish. Moolenaar then transitioned to critical minerals. He asked the secretary to discuss the work the administration has been doing on critical minerals and reliable supply chains, referencing Pax Silica and the Quad Critical Minerals Framework. The secretary's response laid out the operating principle clearly. It is not healthy for the global economy, and it is dangerous for national security for any single country to control 90% of anything critical to your industrial base, your defense base, or your technology base. The principle is structurally bipartisan. Both parties have arrived at the same conclusion through different routes. Pax Silica, in the secretary's description, is a multilateral group of countries cooperating to protect supply chains related to artificial intelligence development. The cooperation covers both physical supply chains and the standards that govern that field. The standards portion is consequential because once a single country sets the standards for a generation of technology, those standards become the global default. The Secretary's framing was that the work is happening now, not as a future plan, and that the participating countries view the standards conversation as important as the materials conversation. The Secretary also referenced a critical minerals ministerial held earlier in the year that brought together 36 or more countries. The number matters. 36 countries is enough to meaningfully reshape the demand structure for processed critical minerals if those countries align their procurement, their refining investments, and their downstream industrial standards. The Secretary noted that critical minerals are now a key component of American diplomacy at every embassy around the world. The two-part framing matters. Access to raw materials is necessary but not sufficient. The ability to process those materials into a usable product is equally critical. The Secretary's substantive point on critical minerals was the vulnerability mapping. The United States, Japan, South Korea, the majority of Europe, and frankly the world face a hyper-concentration of critical minerals processing capacity in a single country. The same concentration applies to pharmaceuticals. The Secretary's framing was that the dependency is structural, not just commercial. In a contingency, the dominant supplier can use access as leverage. In a crisis, the dependent countries can be cut off. The argument for diversification is therefore a national security argument first and a commercial argument second. Moolenaar's final question turned to Haiti. He asked what more the administration, Congress, and the international community can do for a country that has endured years of escalating instability. The Secretary's response described a gang suppression force that has replaced the earlier MSS arrangement. The cost is meaningfully lower, approximately $100 million compared to the $800 to $900 million previously projected, because other countries have stepped up with donations, troop contributions, and police contributions. The force is over-recruited. More commitments to participate have been made than there are operational slots available. The Haiti Gang Suppression Force is a useful case study in burden sharing. The original arrangement involved substantially more American funding and substantially less international contribution. The current arrangement involves substantially less American funding because other countries have committed resources and personnel. The same general model could be applied to other security challenges where the United States has historically borne disproportionate cost. The Secretary's framing was that the United Nations endorsement of the force is what opened the door for the broader international participation. The diplomatic architecture, in other words, is what unlocked the resource architecture. This Moolenaar exchange will be studied for the breadth of its coverage. 5 minutes covered the China-Iran relationship, allied diplomacy at the United Nations, prisoners of conscience as a feature of presidential summits, the security of religious minorities in Iraq, the architecture of allied critical minerals cooperation, and the burden-sharing model for Haiti. Each topic standing alone would deserve a dedicated hearing. The compression in a single round suggests both deep preparation by the member's staff and a secretary who is fluent across the full portfolio. That fluency is a feature of the exchange. The record will show it. Give both sides their due. The member asked 5 distinct substantive questions in 5 minutes and received 5 substantive responses. The Secretary did not duck any of them. He set boundaries on the Chinese missile question by deferring to the Department of War on technical attribution. He set discretion limits on the Jimmy Lai and Pastor Jin questions to protect the underlying negotiation. He set diplomatic limits on the Iraq question by giving the new Prime Minister space. Each limit was principled. The hearing record reflects clear questions and substantive answers. The format worked as designed. So the final accountability question is the standard one. What was gained, what was lost, and who is paying the cost? The gain is a comprehensive on-the-record presentation of how the administration is engaging with 5 different strategic challenges that share the common underlying thread of how the United States navigates a rising China. The cost is that compressing 5 issues into 5 minutes means none of them gets the depth a dedicated hearing would provide. The committee can choose to follow up on any of these threads with focused subsequent hearings. The transcript holds the question. The public can decide what kind of standard it is willing to vote for.